The comms crackled, a harsh staccato over the bridge speakers, and Garrett Langford's knuckles whitened around the edge of his console. The orbital sensor grid was lighting up like a wildfire, dozens of untracked blips converging on Earth's upper atmosphere. No formation matched anything in the database, and that alone made every hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Lieutenant," Garrett barked, voice low but urgent, "confirm that last sweep. I want visual on every contact." The junior officer swore under his breath and tapped rapidly at the controls. "Sir, all the tracking feeds are overloaded. I'm seeing multiple contacts enter orbit at..." He froze. "I don't even know what these are." Garrett leaned closer to the screen, the blue glow casting hard shadows across his face. The shapes weren't conventional. Angular, black, massive. They moved too fast, too coordinated. His stomach turned over. "Get me Julia Spencer on the main console. Now." Julia slid into her station with practiced speed, eyes already scanning the data. "I'm seeing it," she said, voice tight but controlled. "They're broadcasting something, signals, but it's not like anything we've cataloged. Intelligent. And it's repeating." She squinted at the holographic overlay. "This isn't just a pass-through. They're communicating with us." "Communicating?" Garrett's brow furrowed. "Julia, are you saying they're speaking to us?" "Not speaking. Threatening," she said, fingers flying over the interface. "It's a simple message, but it's everywhere. Direct, loud, and repeating in dozens of patterns. Whatever they want, it's clear. Surrender or be destroyed." Garrett's chest tightened. He had been trained for alien encounters, for disaster scenarios, but nothing prepared him for the calm certainty behind a threat like this. Surrender? To what exactly? What the hell are we even facing? Julia hesitated, then looked up from the console. "I don't know the species. I don't know their tech, but they're not just testing us. This is a declaration. And if we misstep, they won't hesitate." Outside the reinforced viewport, Earth's orbit was alive with the approaching shadow of impossibly large vessels. No thrusters. No sound. Just movement and intent. Garrett swallowed, forcing himself to think clearly. "So, we have 48 hours before they decide whether to flatten us or not." Julia's lips pressed into a thin line. "If you ask me, we're already late." Garrett leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "Then we need a plan. We can't just sit here waiting. If they want a fight, we'll give them one, but on our terms. Every second counts." Julia's eyes flicked back to the feed. "I've started analyzing their transmission patterns. There's something in the rhythm, something almost predictable. It's subtle, but if we can decode it, maybe we can find a weakness." Garrett nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "Then we do that. And if they expect us to fold, they've got another thing coming. Earth doesn't surrender." A sudden pulse of light flashed across the sensors, and one of the blips exploded without warning. The concussive shock rattled the station, sending monitors sparking and alarms screaming. Garrett swore under his breath, grabbing Julia's arm as a loose cable whipped across the floor. She steadied herself, her eyes wide, her hands still on the controls. "They're showing us exactly what they'll do if we hesitate." Garrett's gaze hardened, scanning the chaos outside. The shadow of the ships loomed larger, closer. "Then we don't hesitate," he said, voice low, cold, determined. "Not now. Not ever." The feed pulsed again, and this time the message wasn't just repeating. It was moving, shifting, almost taunting them. Garrett's stomach dropped as he realized the scale of what they were facing. The BlackShips weren't just above Earth. They were above every assumption humanity had about survival. And somewhere deep in that certainty, Garrett knew the first move would decide everything. The debris still drifted past the viewport, glowing fragments of what had once been a dockyard large enough to service 3 destroyers at once. Now it was nothing but shards and molten slag, orbiting aimlessly, lighting the dark like a graveyard fire. Garrett Langford stood rigid at the command rail, his hands gripping it so tightly his knuckles ached. The BlackShips had sent their message and Earth was reeling. Casualty report? Garrett's voice was flat, measured, the only way he could keep himself from putting his fist through the console. Dockyard crews were on rotation. Over 12,000 gone in seconds. The lieutenant didn't meet his eyes. The bridge went quiet except for the buzz of failing circuits and the hum of distant alarms. Someone cursed under their breath. Someone else whispered a prayer. Julia Spencer's face was pale in the monitor light, but her focus didn't waver. Her hands were already tearing through layers of code and waveforms, pulling at threads most of the crew couldn't even see. Garrett turned toward her. "Tell me you've got something." She shook her head, exhaling hard. "Not enough yet. Their signal is riding on our satellites, Garrett. They've piggybacked into our whole network. That's how they're flooding every channel at once. It's not pure power, it's leverage. If we can cut their hijack, we cut their voice. Garrett blinked, the thought hitting him like cold water. You're saying they're not broadcasting directly? Exactly. They're good, but they're not gods. They're hijacking what's already here. Which means, Julia hesitated, her fingers tapping on the console. Which means they can be disrupted. One of the junior officers let out a laugh that was half desperation. You're saying we can jam them? You think static is going to stop a ship that just wiped out a dockyard? Julia didn't look up. Not jam them. Confuse them. If we screw with their signal, we don't just block it, we feed it back wrong. Make them chase noise. Make them adapt. Garrett's jaw tightened. And if they adapt faster than we can improvise? Then we're dead, Julia said simply. The honesty silenced the bridge. No false comfort. No speeches. Just truth. Garrett respected that. He drew in a slow breath, then turned to his crew. Prepare a strike team. We're not waiting around for another demonstration. If they bleed, I want to know how deep the wound goes. A low murmur rippled across the room. Some faces turned toward him with relief, others with fear. The chain of command was already fraying. The politicians on Earth were demanding restraint, but up here, on the edge of survival, Garrett knew hesitation was suicide. The lift doors hissed open and Sergeant Connor Price stepped onto the bridge, helmet tucked under his arm. He wore the grin of a man who had lived too many battles and expected to die in the next one anyway. Heard the parties moving outside. About time. Garrett shot him a sharp look. This isn't a party, Connor. It's a probe. In and out. Test their hull, test their defenses. If you get cocky, we lose everyone. Connor raised his hands. Relax, Captain. I'll behave. Mostly. He glanced at the viewport, at the shadows moving beyond it. Just saying, it's nice to finally shoot something that isn't another human. A few of the bridge crew cracked thin smiles despite themselves. The tension eased a fraction and Garrett let it stand. Soldiers needed their sarcasm the way a diver needed air. Julia stood, pulling a data drive from her station and holding it out. Take this. It's got the tracking pattern I've been decoding. If their shields are tied to those rhythms, you'll find a soft spot. It's the best I can give you. Connor tucked the drive into his vest. Appreciate it, document. If I die, make sure they name a drink after me. Something bitter. Don't tempt me, Julia muttered. Garrett stepped forward, lowering his voice so only Connor could hear. Bring them back alive. Even one scrap of their tech could change this fight. You understand? Connor's grin faded, and for a moment his eyes were serious, sharp. Yeah, I understand. The strike team launched an hour later. Sleek fighters dropped from the vigilance bays, engines burning bright as they cut across the void. The BlackShip scout loomed in the distance, a dagger-shaped shadow against the stars. On the bridge, Garrett watched the tactical feed, his heart hammering with each passing second. Julia leaned close to the monitors, muttering calculations under her breath. Fighters closing in. 30 seconds, the lieutenant called. The scout didn't move, didn't fire, didn't react at all. Garrett frowned. They're letting us come. Julia's voice was tight. Or they don't think we matter. The first salvo hit. Human missiles streaked across the void, slamming into the alien hull with bursts of fire. For a moment, Garrett thought it was useless. The scout barely flinched. Then, a jagged section of its armor peeled away, floating into the void. The BlackShip bled sparks, its hull not impenetrable after all. The bridge erupted with shouts, cheers, relief. Garrett exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Julia's eyes lit with something between triumph and terror. We can hurt them, she whispered. We can actually hurt them. But her smile vanished a heartbeat later as the feed shifted. From the wound in the alien ship, a swarm of black drones poured out like hornets from a nest, engines screaming, eyes burning red. The lieutenant's voice broke. Captain, they're coming straight for our fighters. Garrett's pulse spiked and his voice cut like a blade. Get them out of there. Now. The screen filled with movement, human craft already spinning under fire. Julia's hand hovered over the console, frozen for just a moment, before she forced herself back into action. Garrett could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, steady and brutal. The strike had worked. Humanity had drawn first blood. But now the swarm was coming, and there was no telling how many would live to bring that news home. The BlackShip scout seemed to split open like a wound, bleeding out machines that glowed with violent purpose. Hundreds of drones burst free, their movement impossibly sharp, like shards of glass thrown across the void. They didn't maneuver like fighters. They moved like predators. On the tactical feed, Garrett Langford watched them streak toward the human strike team. He could hear the raw panic creeping into the voices of his pilots over comms. Swarm incoming, bearing 7-5. Too fast, can't get a lock. They're already on us. The comms dissolved into screams and static as the first human ship disintegrated under a barrage of energy blasts. A streak of light, then nothing but vapor and shards. Garrett's hands slammed against the console. Pull back. All fighters pull back now. Negative, sir. Connor Price's voice cut through, louder than the chaos, ragged with adrenaline. I've got a shot lined up. If I bail now, it's wasted. Connor, damn it. Garrett's jaw tightened. He could see Connor's fighter diving into the thick of the swarm, weaving through enemy fire with reckless precision. On the bridge, Julia Spencer clutched the railing beside him, her eyes locked on the screens. He won't make it. Connor's laughter burst over the comms, wild and strained. Not with that attitude, document. Garrett wanted to drag him out of the cockpit with his bare hands, but there was no time. Connor's fighter banked hard, rolling between two drones so close their weapons' fire scorched his wing. He loosed his payload, the missile screaming into the carrier drone that coordinated the swarm. The explosion was a white-hot bloom that lit the void. The carrier cracked open like an egg, sending half the drones spiraling aimlessly before they went dead. The bridge crew cheered, but Garrett didn't. He could see the rest of the swarm converging on Connor. His ship was tagged, sparks flying across his hull, alarms blaring over the open comms. Langford, controls are fried. Connor's voice was hoarse, punctuated by grunts of strain. She's not flying straight. Garrett gritted his teeth. Punch out now? Pause. Then Connor's voice, dry even through the panic. You'll owe me a drink if I survive this. The feed showed Connor's fighter spiraling, venting fire. Then the canopy blew, and his seat rocketed into space, leaving the doomed craft to tumble and burst in a blaze. Julia let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. They've got him. We can reel him back in if we move now. Garrett's chest ached, but his tone was steady. Deploy recovery team. Get him before the drones cut the line. The swarm was still tearing into the human formation, and more pilots went silent as the fight dragged on. Garrett's fists clenched so tight he could feel his nails digging into his palms. Every pilot lost was another weight he'd carry. Minutes stretched into agony before the recall order finally got the survivors clear. Only 6 fighters limped back toward the Vigilant. Connor's seat was hauled in by a retrieval craft, his body slumped but alive. The rest, just gone. The bridge was heavy with silence as the fighters touched down. Some of the crew tried to hide their grief behind mechanical efficiency, but the haunted look said enough. Garrett stayed standing at the rail, not daring to sit. Sitting felt like surrender. Julia broke the quiet first, her voice thin but resolute. We did it. Garrett turned toward her slowly. We lost more than half the strike team. Her eyes didn't flinch. And we proved the BlackShips can bleed. That's more than we had yesterday. He wanted to argue, to spit back the names of the pilots who wouldn't ever come home. But she was right, and he knew it. In war, sometimes survival itself was a victory. The medbay confirmed Connor was alive, though barely. When Garrett finally went down to see him, the man was pale, bandaged across his arm and chest, tubes running from his side. Yet even then Connor's smirk cracked through the pain. Captain. Document. You should have seen their faces when I blew that carrier. His voice rasped like gravel. Worth the crash. Julia folded her arms, her sarcasm dry but hiding relief. Yes, I'm sure you terrified the faceless alien drones. Don't ruin it for me, Connor croaked, his grin fading into a grimace. Besides, admit it. I'm the reason you both still have jobs. Garrett shook his head, but the corner of his mouth almost tugged upward. Almost. He sat at the edge of the bed, voice low. You saved lives today. But don't think for a second I'll let you pull that stunt again. Not on my watch. Connor coughed a laugh, his hand pressing weakly against his ribs. Yeah, sure. Next time I'll let someone else be the idiot. Julia rolled her eyes but caught Garrett's glance. For the first time since the attack, he saw something in her expression besides exhaustion. Determination. Back on the bridge, she was already at work with the fragments of data recovered during the strike. The swarm hadn't just been random. Their movements had patterns, almost ritualistic, like a doctrine too rigid to bend. She leaned over the console, murmuring to herself. They're powerful, but they're predictable. If we can exploit that, we might stand a chance. Garrett stepped up beside her, his voice quiet, heavy with the weight of command. Then start breaking the pattern. Outside the viewport, the BlackShips hung like silent executioners, their presence pressing down on every breath. Humanity had struck them, but the price had been steep. Garrett knew the aliens would retaliate with more than drones next time. And when they did, Earth would have to be ready, or burn. The hangar was still half ruined, scorched black where the captured drone had detonated. They had tried to drag it inside, hoping for a breakthrough, and instead nearly lost the Vigilant. The explosion had blown out entire bulkheads, left 2 decks sealed behind emergency barriers, and cost the lives of 13 crew members who had been too slow to get clear. Garrett Langford stood in the twisted wreckage, helmet tucked under his arm, the stench of burned metal and insulation heavy in the recycled air. He had given the order to seal the hangar before the failsafe blew, and though it saved the ship, it gnawed at him. He kept replaying the image of a technician pounding on the closing blast door, her face framed in panic before the bulkhead locked shut. He hadn't even caught her name. Bootsteps echoed behind him. Julia Spencer stepped into the wreckage, her tablet pressed against her chest. Her hair was pulled back, her face still pale from the near disaster, but her eyes were sharp. "I salvaged something." Garrett turned, incredulous. "From this?" She held up the device. "Before the drone cooked itself, I yanked fragments of its core. Not much survived, but enough to piece together their doctrine. They're not improvising. They're following a template. Same ultimatum, same escalation, same swarm deployments. It's a script." Garrett narrowed his eyes. "Meaning what?" "Meaning they've done this before. To others. Dozens of others, maybe hundreds. And they don't change their approach." Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor of unease beneath it. "They don't have to. Planets surrender. Civilizations fold. It works until now." Garrett exhaled through his nose. "So we're the first to punch back." Julia nodded. "And that rattled them. They didn't adapt, not really. They just escalated the way they always do. Which means we can predict their moves. If we can be unpredictable, we can break the cycle." He stared at her, the weight of it settling in. For the first time since the ultimatum, there was something resembling hope. "You're telling me Earth has a chance?" She gave a small, humorless smile. "I'm saying they've never fought humans before. That's our chance." Before Garrett could respond, the comms chimed, summoning him to the secure conference channel. "Earth Command." He almost groaned. The holographic chamber lit with the faces of ministers, generals, and advisors from across the globe. Their voices overlapped the moment he connected, a chorus of fear and frustration. Losses unacceptable. Population panic spreading. Surrender terms could preserve. Garrett cut in sharply. "With respect, surrender preserves nothing. We hand over Earth, we hand over every future we've built. You think conquerors like these leave survivors?" One minister's face tightened. "Captain Langford, you're outnumbered, outgunned, and you've already cost us hundreds of lives. We are negotiating to spare billions." Garrett's jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "You're negotiating with executioners." Julia's words echoed in his head. "They don't adapt." He could see the fear in these leaders' faces, fear that had already surrendered long before the ships fired their first shot. "Do what you want down there," he said coldly. "But up here my crew fights. If Earth still wants defenders, we're it." He cut the feed before they could respond, his pulse hammering in his temples. When the holograms faded, Julia was leaning in the doorway of the chamber, arms crossed. "That went well." Garrett gave her a look. "They're ready to kneel." "We can't." Her tone softened. "I know. But they'll come for you, Garrett. If they decide you're provoking the BlackShips, they'll try to pull you off command. Then they'll have to drag me off," he muttered. Later, in the medbay, Connor Price was sitting upright for the first time since being pulled out of his burning fighter. His bandaged ribs made every breath look painful, but his smirk hadn't dimmed. "You look like hell," Garrett told him. "You should see the other guy," Connor rasped. Then, catching Julia's skeptical glance, he added, "Okay, fine, you should see my ship. It's confetti now. But still." Julia rolled her eyes, but her voice carried an edge of relief. "Try not to kill yourself for 15 minutes, will you? Some of us are busy trying to keep the planet alive." Connor's grin faltered, and for a moment he let the mask slip. His voice lowered. "Those pilots we lost out there, they trusted me to keep formation. And I left them in pieces. I keep seeing their faces when I close my eyes." The humor had drained out of him, leaving something raw. Garrett put a hand on his shoulder, firm. "You gave us proof they can be hurt. That matters more than you realize. Don't bury yourself with ghosts yet." Connor nodded faintly, though his expression didn't ease. Just make sure it wasn't for nothing, Captain. Otherwise, he trailed off, shaking his head. Back on the bridge, Julia pieced together her theory in front of the crew. She projected a sequence of transmissions, comparing them side by side. The ultimatums, the timing, the escalation, they were nearly identical across different intercepted bands. They're not strategists, she explained, her voice carrying across the deck. They're ritualists. They conquer the same way every time, like a predator that hunts the same path. If we break their rhythm, they'll stumble. Garrett studied the projection. And if they stumble? Then we hit them where it hurts. The crew murmured among themselves, some skeptical, some hopeful. For the first time, the idea of victory didn't sound like madness. But as the shift changed and the ship quieted, a new transmission cut across the comms. It wasn't the repeating threat. It wasn't static. It was something different. A voice. Cold, deliberate, and aimed straight at them. You have killed our kin. You will not surrender. You will burn. The bridge froze. The ritual had broken. Julia's eyes widened. They're adapting. Garrett's stomach turned to ice as the BlackShips outside began to shift formation, engines burning brighter. Whatever came next would not follow the pattern. And for the first time, Earth would face the full weight of their wrath. The void outside the Vigilant came alive with movement. BlackShips shifted out of their formation for the first time since they appeared, their massive hulls sliding like blades drawn from scabbards. They weren't repeating the ritual anymore. They were hunting. On the bridge, Garrett Langford stood rigid at the command dais, his hands gripping the rail as if it might anchor him to sanity. The crew was silent, watching the formation collapse into something new, something lethal. Julia Spencer's voice cut through the silence, steady but low. They're breaking their pattern. Which means they're angry or afraid. Maybe both. Connor Price's voice rasped over the comm from the medbay. He wasn't fit to fly, but he had demanded to stay patched in. So we poked the hornet's nest. Now what, Captain? You planning to swat them with your ship's stern? Not swat, Garrett said. His voice carried through the deck, heavier than steel. We hit them in the one place they've never been hit. Together. No rituals, no surrender. Just a fight they can't script. Julia's fingers danced across her console, pulling up tactical overlays. If they adapt, they'll target command ships first. That means us. Which also means, she hesitated, then met Garrett's eyes. If we go down swinging, we might just buy Earth the time it needs to rally. Connor's chuckle crackled weakly through the line. Always wanted to go out in style. The Vigilant surged forward. Outside, Earth's defense fleet, battered frigates, old carriers, and a scattering of civilian retrofits, pulled into formation around her. Not enough ships to match the Black Armada, not by a long shot. But enough to form a wall. Enough to scream defiance into the void. The first strike came like thunder. A beam from the lead BlackShip carved across space, searing through 2 frigates in one sweep. The explosion lit the bridge in white. Shields at 60%, a lieutenant shouted. Return fire. Garrett roared. Missiles streaked out from the Vigilant and her escorts, bright tails vanishing into the dark. They slammed against the enemy hulls, flaring uselessly against layered armor. But one missile, Julia's modification, pierced deeper, a spear of pulsing energy that made a BlackShip shudder. The bridge erupted in cheers. Garrett's chest tightened. They could bleed. The BlackShips responded with fury. Swarms of drones poured forth, thousands of them, a black tide of teeth and claws. They slammed into Earth's fleet like a hurricane. One by one, human ships blinked out in bursts of fire, swallowed by the tide. On the comm, Connor's voice barked orders to the few remaining fighters, guiding them into impossible maneuvers. His body was broken, but his mind was razor-sharp, flying every ship with them in spirit. Cut left, use their momentum. 2 on your 6, dive now. Garrett, for God's sake, break formation or you'll be shredded. Garrett gritted his teeth. Do it. Scatter. Make them chase you. The fleet shattered outward, abandoning neat lines. For the first time, the BlackShips had to track chaos. Drones split into confused packs, chasing prey that refused to play by the rules. Julia's eyes were wide with the thrill of it. It's working. They can't adapt fast enough. But the cost was brutal. A carrier detonated in a chain of fire, its crew of thousands gone in a heartbeat. A retrofit freighter rammed itself into a drone swarm, sacrificing everything to take them with it. Space was littered with wreckage, the screams of dying crews flooding comms until Garrett had to mute them or lose his focus. On the edge of it all, Earth loomed, blue and fragile, waiting. Julia's hands shook as she shoved a fresh overlay onto the screen. Garrett, listen. Their command nodes aren't random. They're networked but centralized. If we can hit the central relay, she pointed to a massive black ship at the heart of the formation bristling with shields. We cut off the swarm, which will paint a target the size of a continent on our backs, Garrett muttered. Exactly. Garrett looked at the faces around him, crew who hadn't slept in days, who had lost friends, family, whole cities. They met his eyes with something more than fear. Resolve. He nodded once. Helm set course. Straight at their heart. The Vigilant lunged forward. Drones swarmed in response, a living storm between them and the relay ship. Weapons blazed, shredding hull and shield alike. Connor, Garrett said into the comm, his voice raw. I need a corridor. Connor didn't hesitate. Then I'll cut one. The fighter squadrons, under Connor's frantic guidance, slammed themselves into the swarm. They weaved through impossible gaps, drew fire, and when there was no path left, they rammed. Connor's voice rose over the chaos, half command, half prayer. Push through. Push through for Earth. The swarm buckled. For a heartbeat, a corridor opened. Now! Garrett shouted. The Vigilant roared ahead, every cannon blazing. Julia launched the last of her modified warheads, streaks of fire aimed like arrows at the relay ship. The black ship's shields flared, buckled, and then shattered. The warheads tore into its core. For a moment, nothing. Then the ship convulsed, a ripple spreading across the network like lightning across storm clouds. Drones froze mid-flight, their connection severed. Entire swarms went limp, drifting in silence. The bridge went dead quiet. Then cheers erupted, wild and ragged. Garrett sank back, chest heaving. Julia, you did it. But Julia wasn't cheering. Her eyes were fixed on the viewport. No, not done. The relay ship was burning but not destroyed. Its core pulsed with growing light, brighter and brighter, until Garrett realized what it was. They're overloading, he whispered. They'll take us with them. There was no time to run. Garrett met Julia's eyes. She nodded once, reading his thought without words. Together they turned to the crew. Prepare for impact. The explosion tore across space, swallowing the Vigilant in light. For long seconds, Earth watched through scattered sensors as fire lit the void. When it faded, wreckage drifted where the black ship once was. The swarm was gone. The armada was broken. And the Vigilant was silent. On Earth, people poured into the streets. They didn't know the names Garrett Langford, Julia Spencer, or Connor Price. Not yet. They only knew that for the first time humanity had stood against the darkness and not been erased. And somewhere, in the drifting wreckage of the Vigilant, a single distress beacon blinked.